and today I want to share with you how to quickly and easily film with the S-Log3 picture profile in your Sony camera. So, if you're a run-and-gun filmmaker like me who films weddings or documentaries where you don't have full control over your lighting, and you don't have time to use something like a gray card, this video will show you how to get great exposure very fast. To save you time though, and to make this picture profile super easy to film with, I've actually created a set of video presets called Who Is Matt LUTs that I've created and tested specifically to work with S-Log3. I'll link to those LUTs down in the video description. I also want you to know that I'm working on an easy color grading tutorial specifically for S-Log3, so please subscribe if you want to see that soon. Getting started now, first off we need to answer the question, can your camera handle filming in S-Log3? Because this is important. Even if your camera shows S-Log3 as an option in menus, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's capable of properly recording with the picture profile. In short, if you're using one of Sony's newer cameras like the A7s III, FX3, FX6, A1, etc., basically any Sony camera that's capable of recording video in 10-bit, your camera can handle S-Log3. But if you're filming with an older Sony camera, like the A7 III, A6600, A6500, 6400, etc., I would not recommend S-Log3. And I actually have a different picture profile that I would recommend for you. I will link to my video about that picture profile in the corner and down in the video description. Now that you know your camera is capable of recording in S-Log3 properly, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of this picture profile. Grab your Sony camera. In my case, I'm using the A7s III. Navigate to the picture profile menu, and the first thing you should do is make sure that your camera is set to PP8, and that for gamma it says S-Log3, and the color mode says S-Gamma3.Cine. If it doesn't say that, scroll down to the bottom to the option that says Reset, and reset PP8 to its default settings. I would highly recommend filming with PP8, but if you scroll around in the picture profile menu, you'll notice that PP9 also says S-Log3. With the only difference being the color mode says S-Gamma3 instead of S-Gamma3.Cine. While there's not a huge difference between these two picture profiles, it's going to be easier for you to color grade footage filmed with S-Gamma3.Cine. So that's why I would recommend PP8 instead of PP9. Moving on, let's talk exposure. One of the biggest complaints that I've heard from filmmakers over the years is that S-Log3 is a noisy picture profile. Filmmakers will record footage in S-Log3, but when they color grade it, the image looks really noisy. Almost like the camera is at a high ISO, even if the ISO is set quite low. If this has happened to you, the reason you're seeing this noise even at low ISOs is because you have not exposed S-Log3 properly. Unlike a standard picture profile that already has saturation and contrast baked in, S-Log3 is a log picture profile, meaning that it's flat and you're going to need to add that contrast and saturation later whenever you color grade. So how do you expose S-Log3 so you don't get a noisy image? Well, this may seem a bit counterintuitive, but you actually want to overexpose your footage when filming. Then, when you color grade, you bring the footage exposure back down when you add contrast and saturation. The reason many filmmakers are seeing noise with their S-Log3 footage is that they're doing the opposite of this. They're filming their footage too dark and then bring up the exposure, which is going to introduce noise to the image. Going back to your camera now, looking at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see your shutter speed, lens aperture, and the letters MM and a number. In my case, it says 0.0. This MM stands for multimeter, and it tells you how bright the image is that your camera is recording. If your camera doesn't say MM here, open the menu and go to Exposure/Color, Metering, and set your metering mode to multi. With a traditional camera picture profile, you would want your camera's metering number next to MM to read 0.0, which means the image it is recording isn't over or underexposed. If your camera says -1.0, it means that it is one stop underexposed. If it reads +1.0, it means it's one stop overexposed. But remember, we're shooting in S-Log3, and you need to overexpose it to make sure it's properly recording. So, you're actually going to want your camera's metering to read between 1.7 and 2.0 stops over. This is going to look bright, but I promise you this is how your S-Log3 footage will look its best. Also, be careful, because when I say 1.7 to 2 stops over, you're going to want to make sure that that 2 isn't blinking. If it's blinking, that means that it's over 2 stops, and that's a bad thing because it's too bright. Now, to help you out with exposure and make sure you aren't overexposing your footage, I would highly recommend using zebras, and not the African animal. I'm referring to the zebra setting of your camera. Zebras will tell you if your footage is overexposed by putting these nice black and white lines that kind of look like zebra stripes on the overexposed parts of your image. You will need to calibrate these zebra stripes to work properly with your S-Log3 footage though. Incidentally, if you've watched my Sony camera menu and custom button setup videos and downloaded my Sony presets, you already have your zebra set up for S-Log3. If you haven't watched those yet, I'll link them up in the corner and down in the description. In case you haven't downloaded those settings though, here's how to set up your zebras properly. Go into your camera's menu, go to exposure/color, zebra display, and for zebra level, you're going to want to go down to C2, so you can set a custom zebra level. Press right and select lower limit, then press right again and change the number to 94 plus. Next, make sure zebra display in the menu is turned on, and as you start to bring up the exposure of your camera, either by changing your aperture or ISO, you're going to notice zebra lines appearing on the overexposed parts of your footage. Because you set your zebra level to 94 plus, that number matches up with the maximum brightness that S-Log3 footage can handle before it clips the highlights, overexposes them, and they cannot be recovered. So, as you're filming with your camera, I would first look at your metering and make sure it's between 1.7 and 2 stops over. And then I would look for any zebras to appear on the screen. If they show up, that could be an issue, but it really comes down to what you're filming. If you're filming a person standing in front of the sunset, and you have the super bright sun clouds behind them, you will probably see some zebras in the background, and that's okay. But if you're seeing zebras on the person's skin, that means that your footage is definitely too bright and your exposure needs to be darker. I would highly recommend filming some test shots with people lit by different light sources. As you gain experience with watching your metering and zebras, you should get a good idea of how the camera is exposing and what looks good. Alright, you've got your metering set up and your zebras. The second to last thing we need to talk about is ISO. If you turn your ISO up, your footage gets brighter. If you turn it down, it gets darker. But there are 2 very important things to keep in mind when it comes to your ISO and S-Log3. Looking at the ISO menu of my A7s III, you'll see that I can actually set my ISO all the way down to 160. But all these ISOs from 160 to 500 have lines on the top and bottom of the numbers. But when you get to ISO 640, those lines go away. This is because for the A7s III and its cinema camera variant, the FX3, whenever you're recording an S-Log3, the recommended base ISO is 640. This ISO 640 is the ISO that Sony recommends if you want to maximize the dynamic range and footage quality you're getting from the camera. As I just showed though, you can go lower if you want to down to 160, but you're going to have 2 issues once you go below 640. The first issue is going to be very obvious. Here's my camera filming at ISO 640 with the zebra showing where the image is overexposed. Drop the ISO to 500 now, and you see the issue? The zebras are gone. Yes, if you set your camera below the minimum base ISO, zebras will no longer work and the camera will not be able to tell you which parts of the image are overexposed. This is a huge bummer, but not the only one. The second issue, which is harder to see when filming but arguably works, is that if you drop your ISO below the base ISO of 640, the camera is going to start to electronically clip the highlights of your footage at a lower level. Here's a clip filmed in S-Log3 at 640 ISO where I lowered the exposure from f4 to f8 and then brought the exposure back up to the proper level by lowering my shutter speed. Notice the histogram on the lower right indicating that the camera is only starting to overexpose once the zebras start to appear at 94 IRE and the camera's metering says it is overexposed by more than 2 stops. Now, when I do the same thing, but I instead drop the ISO from 640 to 160 and then bring down the shutter speed again, the histogram on the bottom right now starts to clip the highlights at a much lower level, leading to the footage losing a ton of dynamic range and completely destroying the image. Strangely though, the camera's metering still only reads 1.7 to 2.0 stops over, even though the highlights are completely clipped. So in short, if you drop your ISO below the base ISO of 640, you will not have zebras, and the camera's metering will no longer be accurate, meaning I would never recommend filming with your camera below the base ISO. Adjust your aperture, your shutter speed, and consider investing in an ND filter before dropping your ISO. Got it? Okay, we've covered minimum ISO, but we aren't quite done talking about ISOs yet. If you have an A7S III, FX3, or FX6, this is going to be important for you because we need to talk about higher ISOs with these cameras. See, these cameras all share roughly the same sensor. And when they're recording in S-Log3, there are some ISOs that I would recommend avoiding if you want your footage to look its best. Remember how I said earlier that one of the main complaints filmmakers have about S-Log3 is that it can be noisy? I said that usually isn't due to ISO, but I do want you to be aware that ISO can sometimes be the culprit. See, this camera sensor shared by these three cameras has what is known as a dual native ISO. This means there are two ISOs where the camera will look its best and give you the best quality footage. This dual native ISO will change depending on the picture profile that you're filming with, but in the case of S-Log3, these ISOs are ISO 640 and ISO 12800. We've already discussed ISO 640, but ISO 12800 is super important too, because while it is a relatively high ISO, it is also incredibly clean with virtually zero grain. Here's my A7S III with the ISO at 2500, cranking it up. And as you'll see, it's getting brighter, but also noisier. Here at ISO 10,000, it's the noisiest. But wait a second, switch it to ISO 12,800 and bang! The footage is clean and doesn't have any noise. So, as a final rule of thumb, I would recommend avoiding some of the noisier ISOs when shooting in S-Log3, namely ISO 6400 to 10,000. If you're shooting in ISO 5000 and you need to brighten things up a bit, skip a few ISOs and go up to 12,800 so your image will be cleaner. Now, we have one last thing to talk about, and this is a tool that will really help you when it comes to properly white balancing your S-Log3 footage. Open your camera's menu, go to Setup, Display Option, turn Gamma Display Assist type to Auto if it isn't already, and then turn Gamma Display Assist on. When you're filming in S-Log3, your camera will now show you a preview that adds contrast and saturation to your footage and shows you what S-Log3 will look like after you've color graded it. To be clear, this is just a preview. Your recorded footage will still be flat and desaturated, but if you want to see how it will look, this is a fantastic feature. Gamma Display Assist is also going to be super helpful to you when you're setting your camera's white balance. Because S-Log3 is so desaturated, it can be difficult to tell if your white balance is set properly, especially if you were filming in a mixed lighting scenario like a wedding or other run-and-gun documentary style event. I have Gamma Display Assist set to a custom button on my camera, so with a simple button press, I can enable it to increase the saturation of my footage and make sure my colors aren't looking too warm or too cool. You can watch my A7S III setup videos to see how to set up this custom button yourself, or you can save time and download my A7S III setup preset, which will give you all of my settings immediately. I'll link to that preset file and my setup videos below. Alright, and that is how to film in S-Log3 quickly and easily. I will also link down below to my S-Log3 color presets if you want to check those out. If you combine those presets with these settings that we've talked about, your footage is going to look awesome. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.
Hi, my name is Mike Landry, and I'm about to give you your free tutorial on the amazing Fuji X-T4. I've been waiting for this camera for a long time. The things that I'm really thrilled about are the in-body stabilization. We have a flippy monitor, so when I'm recording video, I can see what I'm recording, and we have 15 mechanical frames per second. Obviously, there's tons of other great features, but I'm really excited about this camera. If you are coming from another system, or if you're an experienced photographer, you're probably going to want to jump through the table of contents. You can access it by pressing Command F or Control F, depending on the browser that you're using. Type in the topic that you're interested in, click on the time code, jump to that section of the video, and I like to think of this as a video manual that takes you through the steps and processes of operating the camera. That said, if you are a pure beginner or new to photography, this tutorial I'm about to give you is not going to be enough to master the camera and consistently get great images. Outside the operation of the camera, there's about 10 other things that you have to know, including basics of photography, lighting, composition, troubleshooting aspect of this. And then we have the different shooting scenario types. We have flash, we have video features. And for this reason, I am working on an awesome Fuji X-T4 crash course that will take the camera into real world situations and show you how to combine all of these skill sets. Yeah, if you are interested in the Fuji X-T4 crash course, check out the link in the description. We're still in production. That link will take you to my blog. If you leave your name, your email address, we will reach out to you as soon as it's ready.
You are also invited to check out and join my Fuji X-T users group on Facebook, where we can share pictures and ideas about the X-T4. This also allows us to gather widespread user data, which is very helpful for troubleshooting. No trolls, bad energy allowed. That link is in the description.
In any event, we have a tremendous amount of information to cover, so let's get started. First, I want to say thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm stoked to be able to be your instructor for the Fuji X-T4, and I'm going to teach you as much as I can in a limited amount of time we have. So first, let's talk about putting the lenses on. You'll notice that the lens release will line up with our right ring finger. And this is great because you can grab the camera with one hand, get a nice secure grip here, and you can get that lens release. And you'll notice that we have this red dot underneath here. That red dot is going to line up with the red dot you'll see on most 3D lenses. There it is on the 1855 kit lens. We're going to line the red dots up to one another and rotate it until we hear a click. So now we know it's locked. A couple things I want to point out is that when you're changing lenses, try to do so with the mount pointed down. You don't want to have this exposed for very long because you're going to dust in a micro world. And you can get sensor spots when the sensor is exposed. You'll see it in every image. So if you're in a windy condition, recommend not doing it, not changing your lenses. And whenever you do change your lenses, do so with the camera body facing down so the sensor mount is downwards because you have particles that are always falling. Quick side note is that on the crash course you're going to see me put different kinds of filters on the fronts of my lenses, and when we find our filter size, we look underneath the cap. So right here I can see that it's 58 millimeter thread for this mount. So anytime you have a lens, just look under the lens cap, you can see the size of the thread mount. When we're talking about memory cards, I'm a big fan of the SanDisk Extreme Pros. These cards look identically the same, right? Turn them over, clean those flickers to get consistency. You want to use it, turn it on, all ring, first ring. Kind of a nice feature.
That's why it's not like your mom, just a big tray.
Yeah.
I was fucking talking up like that.
She'd say, oh yeah, I'll book myself in and I'll still come in and get them 3 or 4 done before she.
Oh, I was feeling you would.
I was probably fully covered by the time she pulled her and figure out her ass or something.
She's been saying for so damn
Oh, I
long.
know.
There are some videos.
Even before I
She's so lucky that we don't have, even though we put down like valid for 365 days, we don't really have
Yeah.
the expiry date on our vouchers, so she's really
yeah,
lucky.
she was lucky. Well, she said to me, she's like, if I don't use it by the time you're 18, you can use it. She said, I haven't fucking used it.
Yeah.
Might as well make the most of it.
My son had told her that it doesn't expire.
Yeah.
So you can bloody use it, but too late now, and he told her it doesn't expire.
Yeah.
Guess the thing we're going to use, all our vouchers are put in the person's account,
Yeah.
so it doesn't really matter how long.
Yeah.
Since,
I thought, you know, getting her a voucher, there she,
she had to do it.
yeah, had no choice. No.
Nah. She's so cool.
I should have told her it expired and waited until she chucked it out and grabbed it.
Yep. Just like the new vouchers we actually, before that reason, we actually picked the date really clearly.
Yeah.
You know, the nation wasn't that clear, so
Yeah.
but it doesn't really matter. We still got vouchers from, I think it was 2015 that we didn't use up yet. Then we just too scared to use it.
To save money and cost.
Just one excuse I
On the
don't know.
crash course, I talked about the Dodox 1665, $110, demonstrate how to use it, how to set it up, certain examples.
You still live with Ashley and his man and Pop?
No, I moved out a little while ago.
That's easy.
Yeah, exactly. I did move back in with him and his mum.
Okay.
Then yeah, shit went down there and I came home one day and my stuff was on the doorstep in the rain. He put it out there and I was like, righto.
How old are you guys?
Yeah. I had no money, no nothing at the time, didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do. But my brother and his girlfriend actually had a cabin that they own out in Portugal.
Yeah.
So they were letting me stay in that. You know, I was about to get a couch, get all set up, and then 3 weeks later, you know, you've got to move out. After they told me I could have 4 to 6 months in there.
What is England does it now though?
Because they had buyers looking at it, which I knew there was a possible chance to sell it, but I didn't, you know, they said to me, you can't have 4 months. I was like, righto. While I was still looking for somewhere else. They didn't even give me 24 hours notice to get out. Moved me.
I feel sorry for people then, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sort of living with like mum's place, but I'm pretty safe.
Yeah.
Because I'm paying all the bills, so I'm pretty much like,
But they had another cabin for me. It was just around the corner from the one I was in.
yeah.
It was $260 a week. Not
Oh,
even,
you're from your family?
Yeah, and see, they didn't own this one. The guy from the caravan park owned it.
Yeah.
But that wasn't even including power. Then I've also got groceries and everything else I've got to buy. Yeah, I had to take it because I had no other choice, but I was in there for a week, and that weekend I packed up and was like, Dad, you're going to have to come and help me get all my shit because I can't live here. And there's no room for me at Dad's, so I'm sleeping in the lounge room until I can either save up for a caravan to chuck in the backyard.
You will.
Yeah, or start looking when I'm banking a bit of money to sleep in the fucking house.
I think on the kids, like, I think we had a lot easier back in the 80s and the 90s.
I
Like,
wish we could go back there.
yeah, I know.
Have it easier.
Because everyone's got houses, everyone's got jobs, everyone's happy. Like, not like the shit we are nowadays. Like, and they're stuck with churches running the country. Says, oh no, we're better off now. Oh, fuck off.
Yeah.
Fucking Scott Morrison. He's the biggest hypocrite on this planet, and he's the most annoying person. So I think that goes for all the bloody politicians as well.
Yeah.
Auto rotate basically means that when we shoot in the portrait mode, we want this auto rotated with playback. We have our focus, scale units.
Yeah, like back in the 80s and 90s, we had it so great. Like, I don't even remember seeing one of my friends or our friends' brothers or sisters in husband and place to live.
Yeah.
We've got a better family support system,
Yeah.
and our parents back in those days, they've got jobs, they pretty much bought their own houses and shit. Like,
Yeah.
even just on normal simple like wages.
Yeah.
Because mum and dad used to got two, what they call, they used to run 2 places, like they got 2 jobs and stuff.
Yeah.
So they can, but there used to jobs there and everyone's just happy.
Yeah.
Everyone's just a lot happier back then. And all my friends, all their parents, I know, their own houses and stuff back in those
It
days.
was
And,
easier to be happy back in
but,
those days.
yeah, but nowadays, even like, I suppose, since then, everyone's divorced and all that shit.
Yeah.
So I don't really say much anymore. Back in the 2000s come on, and I think all the divorces started in the late 90s, where everyone just thought
Yeah,
that's
everyone was
stuff.
just like, fuck it, fuck
Yeah.
marriage, see you later.
Pretty much fuck everything.
Exactly.
Like, just then all the family support system, like as in like you have a network of families, and that just somehow died with the whole movement as well. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, 80s, 90s were the best times, so I like it back then.
I wish I could be there.
Yeah, I know. But nowadays you kids got all the cool technologies and all the shit
Yeah,
that.
I fucking hate technology. If I didn't have to have a phone for work purposes or being able to contact family, I'd throw the shit in the bin.
Good move.
Oh, I fucking hate it.
Yeah, that's why you never see me on there. I just post you to fucking Facebook status and go.
Yeah, see, I post stupid shit and then I don't even talk to anyone.
No, best way to be, less
Yeah,
drama
and I'm
and
like,
shit.
oh, I don't hear from you. I'm like, yeah,
I'm busy, yeah.
If I'm not posting on Facebook, I'm working or I'm at the gym or I'm just doing something else other than putting on social media.
Yeah, I'm surprised my boy go to the gym now. Like, he used to never been a gym person.
Yeah.
And he's been gym because all his friends at the mainland are gym. And I'm like, okay.
It's helped me through the breakup with Ashton.
Yeah.
It's I was in such a really bad, shitty.
The thing is, really little bit of exercise I used to do when I was younger,
Yeah.
because I used to be crazy, and but I like all the gym related stuff, or even just running. I used to love running.
Yeah.
They're addictive. You just do one, the next time you want to run further, faster.
Exactly, it does, it gets so addictive.
Yeah.
Like I ended up signing up for the 18-month membership because that's how addicted I've gotten to it.
Oops. Are you still doing lots of climbing in the gym, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, like half the time I can call my boy and he's always in the gym.
Yeah, every
And
time.
dude, what do you answer your phone? I'm at the gym, Dad. Okay.
Yeah, Mum's like, every time Mum calls me, I'm out of breath. What are you doing? Oh, I'm at the gym. Oh, I'll leave you to it then. See, but living at Dad's, because I sleep in the lounge room,
Yeah.
it's hard for me to sleep
Should be.
because
Couches and
Yeah.
everyone walking in and out. And
exactly, and they're so fucking loud. So lately I've been running off an hour's sleep. I'll go to work, could be doing,
yeah, a bit like me.
yeah.
I don't sleep. I'm up all day, that's what you see me. I'm making like building shit that I don't need and
Yeah.
making stupid stuff that I'm not supposed to do. I just can't get to sleep.
Yeah.
But mine is a bad habit though, because I started out when I was a kid at high school.
Yeah.
Because I used to work in restaurants, school, then do all my artwork for the magazines and newspapers afterwards. And
Yeah.
okay, we're done. One last.
But I could be doing 10-hour days, running off an hour's sleep, leave, because I'm in Alveston, my
Yeah.
gym's in Devonport, works in Sassafras. Well, I'm like, it's a waste of petrol and, you know, too out of my way to go Sassafras to Alveston, then hours later back to Devonport.
That is a long drive.
Yeah, because my hours can change all the time.
It's like since bloody 1988, I didn't even get all the way to Devonport until I think it was 20 fucking bloody 2016 or 17 when Dylan's going to PHP, so I
Yeah.
didn't need the hours. That's when I finally left my system before I never leave my system.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so pretty, like so much detail. You can get each one of the scales on the snake and last.
There are a lot of options in terms of how to save.
Yeah, I had a feeling you might get all your other big heavy stuff with your mum and get a bullshit
Yeah.
cooking. You hear that, Kylie, Kelly, whatever your name is? Your daughter called you soft cock.
Kelly's a soft cock.
Yeah, after only 15 kids, I was just going like just come get tattooed easy, popping big bloody cannonballs out like that. So, how easy to walk in the park at
Kelly the soft cock pops out 15 kids but can't do with a bit of ink on the body.
Yeah, we've been waiting for how many years? 2 years now already.
Yeah.
File names is 4 digits, SRTB is 4 digits, we can change that. Then we get into
Yeah.
card slot
Let me get
settings.
this
This is
mic
really
over.
great because we now record simultaneously.
Clean it up and put that.
So still image card slot settings sequential means that once the first card fills up,
Let's trick
the
that.
second card
At least that camera didn't snap.
Camera didn't fall.
Yeah, I'll snap.
Yeah.
cards, or we can record raw images to one and JPEGs to the other. When we're dealing with video, we have the ability to overflow from one to the other. So as we're filling up those memory cards, it just prints one copy, it's full, this is card 2, or we can write to both memory cards at the same time. We'll record the video, and we also have the slot select, which basically maps which slot to start with right now. We can select the folder that we're writing to. We can also create new folders down here. Give it a name. And finally, we have our copyright information, which allows us to enter our name, our company, and that will be embedded to the executed file itself. So that is the skills menu. Real quick, let's talk about the live menu. It's right here. It's kind of grayed out. You can't really
You gotta
see
look
it.
say along with
We
it.
found under
That's what
new
we
setting. Down to the define menu setting.
So there could be arm on there so we actually can see from that angle.
And the idea on this is that we just get to pick the items that we're going to use them on. Okay, so we have that. Jump around. So we have these 2 items. We can control.
It's not bad, it's like 2 hours and 20 minutes.
That's not too bad.
Yeah, we're just going to chat for 2 hours because I'm a nice person today. See you
Nice
out
person
now.
today.
That's cool.
Yeah, how's the nice week been going for you?
one of the buttons supposed to focus for me, but I don't know. Yeah, found it. No, it didn't focus. Focused. I was surprised at how long the bloody camera lasts, like the power should go on. Oh, well, she got 2 bars, but no, that's not too bad.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, 2.5 hours, she got 2 bars left. And the top one straight on well, so